Good morning to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for Sunday the 18th of June, 2017. Of course, we've got our two systems here to keep an eye on. Invest areas 93L now in the Western Caribbean and 92L out here in the tropical Atlantic. And the one in the Western Caribbean is, I guess, the higher chances of the two, as conditions, I guess, not as favorable out here for this to develop as maybe some folks were thinking, but there's still a window of opportunity for this to become, and then they list it as a 50-50 shot before reaching the Caribbean. This becomes at least a depression, if not a named storm. And then, of course, we have our system here, Invest Area 93L, tucked away in the Gulf of Honduras, just east of Belize. So let's look at the visible satellite animation for this morning, and we notice that interesting flare-up of thunderstorms with 93L. The center of circulation is supposed to be over here, but a majority of the convection is off to the east. What does that mean? Well, it's certainly part of what it means is that it's not very well organized just yet, and we'll take a look at a close-up animation of that in a moment. Meanwhile, 92L out here in the Atlantic trying to curl up. You can clearly see the rotation with it, but it's really confined to one pretty solid band on the north side, a little bit of inflow, as we call it, and banding on the south side, but nothing substantially organized, and as such, it is not a tropical depression just yet. But there is that window of opportunity as it moves off towards the Windward Islands here over the next few days, that areas like Barbados down to Trinidad and Tobago. Definitely want to keep an eye on this for, at the very least, just the squally conditions that it could bring and the boating interest that would have the most impact from that for sure. So as we see, broad turning with the system, but really no well-defined bands. I mean, you can clearly see from the satellite imagery that it's still rather disorganized. However, for it being June 18th, and we're even talking about a tropical wave with the potential to develop as it moves off. I don't know why that arrow shows up like that. That's funny. To the west and west-northwest is interesting in and of itself, and it might portend a busy season ahead. If we don't get any more of these happening between now and the end of July, then this was just a fluke, an anomaly. But we'll see. It's interesting. Maybe it means something. Maybe it doesn't. Meanwhile, in the Gulf of Mexico, which is up here, nothing really happening just yet, but this system moving out of the Caribbean, either, the Hurricane Center track in the cone there that they show, or whatever you call that on the Outlook, moves this across the Yucatan into the southern Gulf, but the GFS and some of its models bringing it up across and through the what is this called? The Yucatan Channel, had to remember there, and into the eastern Gulf of Mexico, perhaps. So there's definitely a split in the model guidance. And it's interesting, too, if you note, remember the center of circulation is supposed to be in here somewhere. But if we look at the satellite animation, it looks like there's some turning going on out over this way. And that might just be in the mid-levels. And once the Hurricane Hunter gets out there later today, that is tentatively scheduled, we'll know a lot more as they investigate it in person, so to speak. All right, so looking at the upper level winds, what a change from especially yesterday. We can clearly see these wind barbs now going out in different directions like this, instead of just blowing across the top of it, which is what would be happening if it was farther north. So as this high pressure area in the upper levels, 100 to 250 millibars up in the atmosphere, builds north, if it does so more expansively, then this will have an opportunity to develop and maybe become a tropical storm. Meanwhile, out in the Atlantic with our other system, 92L over here, upper level winds generally favorable, but it's running out of time as we have this pretty sharp trough here, upper level low sitting up to the north, and very strong winds coming up out of the south and southwest, which is typical. And it's interesting, too, because they're not just blowing westerly across the tropics like this, which is what we would see in an El Nino year. This is just more of your sort of small upper tropospheric trough, which are very common throughout the season regardless. Looking at the vorticity, again, I use this as a measure of the strength of our systems, the spin in the atmosphere, and you notice with 92L, fairly well developed down here, while the system in the Western Caribbean, 93L, not so much. So we'll watch this over the next few days, and we'll see how this evolves. And the more round it gets, and to point that out again, you notice even though this is not as well organized down here, and let me get a bigger, what we call line thickness here to show you. There we go, that's much better. Even though this is not as well organized, it's got more vigor to it. Overall, the vorticity or spin in the atmosphere is stronger than what we see over here in the Western Caribbean. So let's see if they catch up with each other over time. All right, looking at the plot for 92L, a little bit more divergence in the models, showing that it may go a little bit farther to the north, and some of them are more to the south. So you have a larger angle overall, and if you had to draw a cone out of this, you can see that that becomes a little bit larger. And the GFS, that's this line right here, the interpolated, brings it, what's left of it anyway, just to the south of Jamaica in about 5 days. Bottom line for you folks here in the islands, keep an eye on it, and remember, squally conditions, gusty winds maybe to tropical storm force, even if this remains a well-developed tropical wave and, quote, nothing more, end quote, right? You just can't discount, well, it's not anything to worry about. 50-mile-per-hour wind gust on your sailboat and a heavy thunderstorm, you want to know about that. All right? The intensity plot's not very aggressive for 92L overall. The GFS tries to ramp it up still into tropical storm intensity, and then it has more shear, I guess, associated with it down the road, say about 60 hours or so, and then most of the modeling here dropping off pretty substantially as it moves into the Caribbean. So not too worried about it in terms of significant impact, but a reminder, you folks in the islands, it's headed your way, generally speaking, and you want to be prepared for whatever comes, all right? And remember, you've got some great tools in Hurricane Pro and HD to follow along, and I'll mention that from time to time just to remind you. And you can see some of the things that I'm talking about, especially since they update between the times that I do the updates. Have a great rest of your Sunday. Thanks as always for tuning in to these. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. That's my website. And for Hurricane Pro and HD, I'll be back with much more for you the week ahead.